Let's go live to a press briefing that is happening at the Ministry of External Affairs.
In addition, the following documents were agreed and exchanged today. Implementing arrangement between the European Commission and the Science and Engineering Research Board for Indian researchers, hosted by the European Research Council grants. European Investment Bank finance contract for Bangalore Metro Rail project phase 2 R6 for euro 300 million. Joint declaration between Internal Secretariat of International Solar Alliance and the European Investment Bank. EU as a bloc of 28 countries is India's largest regional trading partner. India's total trade in goods and services exceeds $100 billion. So the bilateral trade in goods is it's over 85 billion, while the bilateral trade in services is over 31 billion. Moreover, over the period April 2000 to December 2016, FDI equity flows from EU countries totaled over $79 million at 24.58 of total FDI flows to India. This would make the EU India's largest source of FDI. So I would like to just highlight a few of the points from some of the documents, and you would then find also the texts on the website where you could look for any further details that you may be interested in. So looking at the India-EU joint statement on cooperation in combating terrorism, the highlight of this document, the most important highlight, of course there are many important things in this document. The most important highlight is that for the first time the EU has agreed to mention not just terrorist entities but also terrorists in an India-EU document. So this document, it firstly condemned the recent terrorist attacks in India and member states of the European Union, and it also reaffirmed the determination to jointly combat terrorism and violent extremism in all their forms and manifestations, irrespective of their motivations, wherever and by whomever they are committed. They welcomed the resolve to deepen cooperation on domestic and international terrorist designation listing proposals through exchange of information. So they have agreed to exchange information on domestic and international listing of terrorists and on these proposals basically. The leaders also called for the perpetrators of terrorist attacks like the ones at Pathankot, Uri Nagrota, Anantnag, Srinagar, Paris, Brussels, Nice, London, Stockholm, Manchester, Barcelona, Turku, and of course they recalled the Mumbai terror attacks in of 2008. So the leaders called for the perpetrators of these attacks to be brought to justice. They also supported the comprehensive, early adoption of the. They supported the early conclusion of negotiations and the adoption of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism in the UN. They recalled that responsible states should take adequate measures to ensure that their territory is not used for terrorist activities. They also this document also speaks of cutting the flows of funds and other financial assets and economic resources to individuals and entities involved in terrorism, including those proscribed under the relevant UN sanctions. So, coming to the list, the entities and individuals who have been identified or included in this document, let me read out the whole para. The leaders agreed to strengthen cooperation to take decisive and concerted actions against globally proscribed terrorists and terror entities, including Hafiz Saeed, Zakiur Rahman Lakhvi, Dawood Ibrahim, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, Haqqani Network, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Daesh, and their affiliates. So, that is for this document on combating terrorism. Let me now turn to the India-EU joint statement. So, it is a fairly lengthy document, so I'm trying to see how I can cut it short. Well, it recognizes that India and EU are natural partners, and it agrees or recognizes the need to further deepen and strengthen the India-EU strategic partnership based on our shared principles. And I won't repeat the principles because you can find it in the statement. They expressed satisfaction with the progress that has been achieved and the bilateral cooperation that has developed since the last summit. The leaders committed to work in a result-oriented and mutually beneficial manner to further strengthen the India-EU strategic partnership by deepening their trade cooperation, enhancing investment flows in both directions, etc. They commended the strong engagement of the European Investment Bank in India in a wide range of sectors. They reaffirmed their commitment to an open, free, secure, stable, peaceful, and accessible cyberspace, and welcomed the holding of the 5th Global Conference on Cyberspace in New Delhi on 23 and 24 November. They strongly condemned the recent terrorist attacks in many parts of the world. And amongst other things, they emphasized the need to deepen cooperation within the UN and the Financial Action Task Force. On disarmament, the EU congratulated India on its admission to the Missile Technology Control Regime. Then, coming to regional issues, on Afghanistan,
so several topics regarding the cooperation, the further cooperation between the European Union and India. Let's remind that the European Union as a whole, as a 28-nation bloc, is India's largest regional trading partner, but also a lot of security on the table when it comes to this sort of meeting. The India-European Union summit kicked off today in New Delhi. Leaders of the European Union met and held talks with the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, and the European Union Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, are in the national capital for the talks. Addressing the media after their round of meetings, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that both sides have agreed to strengthen cooperation and coordination in several key areas, and these including counter-terrorism, which is perhaps the most important field of cooperation that India has been advocating and requesting to all its foreign partners during the Narendra Modi government, but also before. Among others, they have obviously discussed the pending issue of the free trade agreement.
The third agreement has been implemented.
The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, took a different trajectory though and spoke about the ongoing Rohingya crisis and the tensions in North Korea.
Narendra Modi ji, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to today's ceremony where three doctors step forward and exchange their comments.
Today, the 14th summit between India and the European Union took place in the Indian capital city of New Delhi. The President of the European Commission, Donald Tusk, and also Juncker were present and met the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, to talk about the several areas of cooperation. Of course, the free agreement was also on the table, a long-standing issue. What is most important, they discussed, especially on India's request about counter-terrorism and the necessity to do more in order to tackle terrorist organizations all over the world. The European Union as a whole, as a 28-nation bloc, is India's largest regional trading partner. The bilateral trade is in goods. The bilateral trade amounts at 88 billion in 2016. It seems though that on the European agenda there was a point which was not on the Indian agenda during this meeting, which was the Rohingya crisis. And for more on this story, I am joined by our colleague, senior correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran from the Newsroom. Ramesh, thank you very much for joining me. So, counter-terrorism once again, especially on India's agenda. What is the latest on that?
Absolutely, Daniele. There are two joint statements issued towards the end of the 14th EU-India summit, which concluded here in New Delhi just a short while ago. And one was a joint statement, and the other was a joint statement specifically on the issue of counter-terrorism or combating terrorism. And for the first time in an EU-India joint statement, the language used is interesting to the extent, if I can just quote the relevant para from the joint statement, it says, the leaders agree to strengthen cooperation to take decisive and concerted actions against globally proscribed terrorists and terror entities, including, and this is the important point, Hafiz Saeed, Zakir Rahman Rakvi, Dawood Ibrahim, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, Haqqani Network, Al-Qaeda, Daesh and their affiliates. So for the first time we're seeing specific mention of the names of terrorists, those who are conducting activities against Indian interests specifically.
And Ramesh, on the table there was a long-standing issue, which is the so-called Treaty of Free Fiscal Free Movement of Trade between the European Union as a whole and India. What about that?
Well, clearly the trade and investments form a key component or agenda item for the EU and India leaders, Daniele. And the free trade agreement or the discussions around it are still a work in progress. Both sides say they are committed to agreeing or reaching a consensus on the free trade agreement draft per se, and then to implement it going forward. The talks are continuing even as we speak, but both sides remain optimistic on reaching an early conclusion on the draft of the FTA.
And Ramesh, also it seems that more, I would say, on the European Union's agenda, there was an issue, the Rohingya issue, which perhaps regarding this meeting was not on India's agenda. The European Commission President said that India is on the first line and has, to quote him, has India needs to do something to resolve the Rohingya crisis at the roots.
Indeed, that's very correct and accurate, Daniele. in the joint press statement between the EU and Indian leaders that concluded in New Delhi just a short while ago, two key regional issues engaged their attention. One was North Korea, and the second was the issue of migration and refugees in relation to the Rohingya crisis. Now, the EU, for its part, maintains that India, as you said, should be the first responder in this case because it is the most proximate neighbor to both Bangladesh and Myanmar. But also the EU maintains that the Rohingya refugees should be allowed to return voluntarily to Myanmar with safety and with dignity.
Thank you very much. I'm also joined by Mr. Sushant Sarin, Strategic Affairs expert. One question straight away. Was, according to you, the European Union take on international terrorism war enough? Do you think India is satisfied?
Well, I would say I'm partly satisfied, not entirely, because while they have named many of the groups which are responsible for terrorism, especially in India and even in Afghanistan, but I think it's about time that if these groups are receiving the support of states, then those states need to be named and shamed. I think the EU has been soft-pedaling on the state sponsorship of terrorism by countries like Pakistan, and that is a bit of a disappointment as far as I am concerned. But of course, to the extent that terrorist groups like Hizbul Mujahideen, the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the others have been named, I think there's something to be said for that. The second thing, I think, which is very important is that while there are a lot of pious statements on cracking down on terrorism, on ending the funding and the arms supply to some of these groups, I think some of the concessions which the EU has given to countries like Pakistan is something that India needs to bring up much more strongly with the EU, because not only do they violate WTO commitments of the EU, they also actually reward countries for acts of terrorism. So I think that is a bit of a dampener, but other than that, it's pretty much satisfactory.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us, Sushant Sarin, a strategic expert from New Delhi, and Ramesh Ramachandran, our international senior correspondent, helping us to decode a bit better the meeting, the 14th meeting between India and the European Union.